On my birthday, my parents handed my present to my brother and told me, "You're not worth anything." I kept quiet. That same night, I packed my bags in silence. Weeks later, as they celebrated his birthday again, their phones exploded with 74 missed calls and a message they couldn't believe. Can you imagine the people who were supposed to love you most, bleeding you dry, using you as a backup plan, and then telling you, point blank, that you deserved nothing? I was always the invisible brother, the forgotten son, but on my 26th birthday, their cruelty ignited a fire that would eventually burn their entire world down. My name's Leon, and for as long as I can remember, I was the background character in my own family. Not the golden child, not the troublemaker, just there. You know, like an afterthought. I used to tell myself that every family had favorites, that it was normal. But in my house, favoritism wasn't just a lean, it was a blinding spotlight on my younger brother, Evan, while I stood outside, tripping in the dark. It started small, the kind of things you brush off as a kid. If Evan and I both brought home good grades, he'd get a new video game. I'd get a pat on the back and a reminder to try even harder next time. Birthdays? His was always a spectacle, custom cake, balloons, a mountain of gifts. Mine? Maybe a half-hearted cupcake or a card that felt like it was signed out of obligation. I tried to convince myself it didn't matter, that I wasn't the type to crave attention. But deep down, every single one of those skipped acknowledgments chipped away at me, leaving this quiet, dull ache that followed me right into adulthood. By the time I hit 26, I genuinely thought I was numb to it. I had my own job, my own small apartment, friends who actually saw me in a way my family never did. Still, I showed up for family birthdays, anniversaries, dinners. A tiny part of me still clung to this foolish hope that maybe, just maybe, things would balance out one day. My birthday this year was supposed to be a quiet one. I wasn't expecting much. A card, maybe dinner. When we gathered in the living room, I saw only one neatly wrapped box on the coffee table. Small, shiny blue paper, a little ribbon. My heart actually fluttered. A faint smile touched my lips. This time, I thought, they remembered. But then my mom picked up the box. And she handed it to Evan. My stomach twisted into a knot you wouldn't believe. "This is from us," she said, brightly, watching him rip into the paper with that smug grin he always wore when the world revolved around him. Inside was a sleek smartwatch, the exact one I'd been saving up for myself. My father chuckled. Evan slipped it on, and then Dad said, "Perfect fit for the perfect son." I sat there, frozen, my smile a plastic mask, my fingers digging into my jeans. Then my mom turned to me, her voice cold, the words burning into my memory. "Leon, you don't deserve anything right now. You should be grateful we even let you come over." It was like the air got sucked out of the room. Evan laughed softly, not maliciously, but in that careless, entitled way someone laughs when they're used to being adored. My chest tightened, my heart pounded. But I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't even leave. I just sat there, silent, nodding as if I agreed with them. But inside, man, something just cracked. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I went back to my old room in that house. It still smelled faintly of dust and old carpet. And I started packing. Not frantically, no tears. Slowly, deliberately. Each shirt folded neatly. Each book stacked carefully. I didn't slam drawers. I didn't stomp down the hallway. I didn't want them to hear me. I wanted to leave the same way they treated me, without acknowledgement. By morning, my car was loaded. I stood in the driveway for a moment, looking back at the house where I'd spent years waiting for something that never came. No one noticed me pulling away. No one came outside to stop me. It was as if I'd been erased before I even left. Weeks passed. I didn't reach out. I didn't answer their calls, not that there were many. For the first time, I felt this strange, quiet peace, like I'd finally cut the strings holding me in place. I poured my time into work, into building something of my own, into surrounding myself with people who actually valued me. But then came the moment that made me realize the story wasn't over. Weeks later, on Evan's birthday, while they gathered again around the table with cake and candles, singing to him like always, their phones lit up. All at once. 74 missed calls. And a single message, one they never expected to see. And that's where everything began to change. See, I didn't send that message lightly. It wasn't some impulsive burst of anger. No, it was calculated. The result of weeks of silence where I finally had time to think, really think about how my family treated me. The truth is that one night wasn't an isolated event. It was just the breaking point in a pattern of mistreatment that ran deeper than they could ever imagine. Growing up, Evan was the sun, and we were all expected to orbit him. If he wanted something, it was delivered. If I wanted something, too expensive. Not practical. I remember when I was 16, I saved for months doing odd jobs just to buy a guitar. The day I brought it home, my dad looked at me and said, "Why waste your money on that? You'll never be good enough to play anywhere." I laughed it off, tried to shrug it away. But Evan, when he turned 16, they surprised him with a car. A used one, sure, but still a car. And when he scratched it a week later, texting while driving, Dad patted him on the back and said, "Don't worry, son. We'll get it fixed." That was how it always went. If Evan failed, it was a learning experience. If I succeeded, it wasn't enough. And as adults, nothing changed. I remember one Thanksgiving not long before my birthday. I brought a bottle of wine I'd saved up for something special. My mom glanced at it, muttered cheap under her breath, and shoved it to the side. Evan walked in late, empty-handed, and everyone lit up like he was some celebrity making an entrance. He told one joke about his job, and suddenly, he was the most charming man alive. Meanwhile, when I shared news about a promotion I'd worked years for, my father said, "Don't get cocky. That place will replace you in a heartbeat." It wasn't just neglect. It was dismissal. Like I wasn't a real person with accomplishments or feelings. And the more I think back on it now, the more I realize they weren't just blind to me. They chose to belittle me. After I left that night with my suitcase, I promised myself I wouldn't go back. But silence doesn't stop old wounds from throbbing. My mother would occasionally text me short messages, things like, "Family dinner Sunday. Don't forget," as if nothing had happened. No acknowledgement of what they'd said on my birthday. No apology. Once, she even sent me a photo of Evan wearing the smartwatch with a caption, "Doesn't it suit him perfectly?" It was like they enjoyed, reminding me of my place. Then there was my father. He called me one evening after I'd been gone for 2 weeks. His tone wasn't warm, wasn't curious about how I was doing. It was sharp, condescending. "Your mother's worried you're ignoring us. Don't be dramatic, Leon. You've always been too sensitive." Evan didn't mean anything by it. You should be proud of him. He's making us all proud. Proud. That word felt like a knife. It was always about Evan. His new job, his new apartment, his girlfriend, his prospects. I could have climbed a mountain and planted a flag with my bare hands, and they'd still tell me I was standing in the wrong spot. The worst part came when they started to use guilt as a weapon. My mom called one night while I was working late, her voice dripping with practiced sadness. "You know, Leon, you're tearing the family apart with this distance. Evan misses you. We all miss you. Don't let pride ruin everything." I didn't say anything, but inside I wanted to scream. Pride. That's what they thought this was about? Then the manipulation took an uglier turn. My father showed up at my apartment once. He didn't call ahead, didn't knock politely, just barged in like he still owned a piece of me. He looked around, unimpressed, and said, "So this is where you've been hiding. Do you really think you can shut us out? Family is family, Leon. Don't forget who gave you everything." Everything. That word echoed in my head. Did they really believe they gave me everything? I thought of every night I stayed up late studying alone. Every shift I worked to cover my own expenses. Every insult dressed up as advice. They hadn't given me everything. They had taken more than they ever gave. And through all of this, Evan stayed silent. He never reached out, never apologized, never even asked why I left. Instead, I'd see him in pictures online, surrounded by my parents, living in the comfort I was denied. In one photo, he was cutting into a cake while my mother clapped and my father beamed. It wasn't even his birthday. It was mine. That's when I realized the truth. My family didn't just prefer Evan. They had erased me from their story. And if they were going to erase me, I was going to rewrite the ending myself. Which brings me back to that night, Evan's birthday. The candles were lit. The singing had begun. And for a moment, they were basking in their perfect little world again. But then their phones buzzed. First one, then another, then all of them. Notifications piling up. Missed calls, 74 in total. And at the center of it all, a message they never expected. That was the moment the balance began to shift. The night of Evan's birthday should have been uneventful for me. I was miles away, sitting in my apartment with a glass of water in hand, trying not to think about them. But the truth is, I knew exactly what they were doing. I could picture the cake, the candles, the way my mother's voice would lead the song slightly off-key, my father's booming laugh echoing through the house, and I knew Evan would be standing there, basking in it all, smiling like he deserved every ounce of their affection. That picture used to hurt me, but now it fueled me. That was the night I pulled the trigger on something I had been quietly setting up for weeks. See, when I left their house after my birthday, I didn't just pack my clothes. I took my old file box with me. The one that held years of bank statements, receipts, paperwork. My parents had always underestimated me. But one thing they never realized was that I noticed everything. Every missing dollar from the savings account I'd worked at as a teenager. Every time they borrowed money that was never returned. Every bill that somehow ended up in my name instead of theirs. When I was 19, my father had pressured me into co-signing a loan for the family's benefit. I didn't even know at the time that he'd pinned the responsibilities squarely on me while Evan enjoyed the car that loan bought. I spent years quietly paying it down while they pretended it never existed. It wasn't just money, though. It was trust. When I was 22, I came home early one evening and overheard my parents talking about me in the kitchen. My mom's voice was sharp, dismissive. Leon will never be anything. He doesn't have the charisma, the confidence. We should invest in Evan. He's our real future. My father agreed, laughing as he said, Leon's the safety net, the backup. He'll never shine. I stood in the hallway that night, invisible, realizing in one crushing moment that I wasn't just unloved. I was insurance. Someone they could rely on only when things went wrong. That memory haunted me. But now it became fuel. So, in the weeks after I left, I started making quiet moves. I called the bank. I pulled every record with my name on it. I consulted a lawyer, a calm man with steel gray hair, who looked at the paperwork and raised an eyebrow. Leon, he said, do you realize how much liability they've shoved onto you without your consent? Hearing it from him made my stomach twist, but it also solidified my resolve. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't crazy or oversensitive. They had used me over and over, and now they were going to see the consequences. The betrayal that stung the most, though, came just a few days before Evan's birthday. I was scrolling through social media late at night when I saw a post from him. A photo of the smartwatch on his wrist, captioned, "Thanks to Mom and Dad for the best birthday gift. Couldn't ask for a better family." My gift. The one I had saved for, hinted about, hoped for. The one they had snatched away from me with a smile and handed to him. It wasn't just a watch. It was a symbol. Proof that no matter what I did, no matter how much I worked or achieved, I would always be second place in their eyes. That was the moment something in me hardened. I had always clung to this fragile thread of hope that maybe one day they'd see me differently. But that post cut the thread clean. I wasn't part of their family. Not really. I was a placeholder, a name on documents, someone to dismiss when convenient and lean on when necessary. And so, on the night of Evan's birthday, as they sang and laughed, their phones lit up. 74 missed calls. A message waiting. The message wasn't angry. It wasn't a rant. It was short. Almost cold. Check your accounts. Within minutes, I knew the celebration had soured. Because while they were busy pouring cake slices and singing songs, the financial rug they had been standing on for years was being pulled right out from under them. But the money was only the beginning. Because the real betrayal, the one they never saw coming, wasn't just financial. It was the truth I was about to lay bare. The truth I had carried in silence for years. And when that truth came out, it wouldn't just break their trust in me. It would shatter the perfect little world they had built around Evan. After I sent that message, those 3 simple words, check your accounts, I thought I'd feel instant relief. I thought the years of being dismissed, belittled, and erased would suddenly fall off my shoulders. Instead, I sat in my apartment, with the silence pressing against my chest. A heavy, suffocating kind of silence. My phone buzzed relentlessly for hours. First from unknown numbers, then from my mother, then my father, then even Evan. I didn't answer a single one. I just stared at the screen as the calls stacked up. 10, 20, 50, 74. I turned the phone face down and let it vibrate against the table until the battery died. But the aftermath wasn't clean. Revenge isn't a switch you flip. It's messy, complicated, and it always drags pieces of you down with it. For the next few days, I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed moments from my childhood. Sitting at the dinner table while Evan told stories and everyone laughed while I pushed food around my plate, invisible. My dad's voice telling me I'd never amount to anything. My mom sighing whenever I spoke, like my words were a burden. I had thought that by finally standing up for myself, I'd be free. But freedom has a strange way of feeling empty when you've been chained for so long. Then the fallout began. My parents didn't just call. They showed up. It was a Thursday evening when I heard the knock. No, not a knock. A pounding on my apartment door. I didn't move. I just sat there, my heart racing as my mother's voice rang through the hallway. Leon, open this door right now. What have you done? Do you have any idea what position you've put us in? My father's voice followed, lower but sharper. You're going to regret this. Family isn't something you walk away from. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I waited until their voices faded, until the sound of their car pulling away finally left the night quiet again. But something about their anger lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. I realized then that for the first time, they weren't dismissing me. They were afraid of me. And oddly, that fear made me feel both powerful and utterly alone. The loneliness cut deeper than I expected. My friends noticed it too. One night I was sitting with Marcus, a guy I'd known since college, and he leaned across the table and asked, "Man, are you okay? You've been different lately." I wanted to tell him everything, but how do you explain years of invisible wounds to someone who hasn't lived them? I just shrugged, muttered something about stress at work, and changed the subject. Inside, though, I was unraveling. Work was no escape either. My mind wandered constantly, my focus slipping. My boss pulled me aside after a meeting and said, "Leon, you're usually sharp as a tack. What's going on?" I didn't have an answer. How could I explain that while my colleagues were worried about deadlines and projects, I was stuck replaying the sound of my father's laugh when he called me a failure, the way my mother's eyes glazed over whenever I spoke. The lowest point came one night when I stood in front of the mirror brushing my teeth and barely recognized myself. My eyes looked hollow, my face pale, my shoulders slumped like I was carrying weights no one else could see. For a moment, I wondered if they had been right all along. If I really was the background character in my own life. But then something shifted. It was subtle, like a flicker of light in a dark tunnel. I realized that for the first time in years, I wasn't bound to their approval. They could hate me, call me dramatic, call me ungrateful, but none of that mattered anymore. I had broken the script they'd written for me, and that meant I could start writing my own. So, I began planning quietly. Not grand schemes of revenge, not yet. Just small steps toward reclaiming myself. I started documenting everything. Every loan, every account, every moment. I had evidence of being used as a scapegoat. I bought a second file box and organized it neatly, label by label, like a soldier preparing an arsenal. It wasn't about striking back yet. It was about making sure that when the time came, I wouldn't falter. I also started pulling away more deliberately. If my parents texted, I didn't respond. If they showed up, I didn't answer. Evan tried once, leaving a voicemail that was surprisingly calm. "Leon, I don't know what's going on, but you don't have to do this. Just call me, okay?" I stared at that message for a long time. Maybe part of him meant it, but then I remembered the photo of the watch, the smug caption, the years of him standing silently while I was erased. No, Evan wasn't innocent. He was complicit. Every day felt like walking a tightrope between despair and determination. I had moments where I wanted to cave, to go back, to apologize, just to feel like I had a family again. But then I'd open my file box, run my hands over the documents, and remind myself, they chose this path. They chose to betray me. And as I slowly rebuilt myself, I began to see a new horizon. I didn't just want to break away anymore. I wanted to rise so high that they would choke on their own words when they saw me again. But before that rise, I had to endure the fall. And the fall was far from over. The weeks after that rock-bottom stretch were some of the hardest of my life, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. It started with small choices, things that didn't seem monumental at first, but added up to something bigger. I forced myself to run every morning, even when my body ached and my mind screamed at me to stay in bed. At first, I couldn't manage more than a mile without stopping. But eventually, I found myself running further, faster, stronger. Every drop of sweat felt like I was pushing out years of neglect, years of invisible weight. I poured myself into work, too, but this time with a sharper edge. Instead of letting my family's voices echo in my head, telling me I wasn't enough, I drowned them out with results. I stayed late at the office, not out of desperation, but because I wanted to prove to myself what I was capable of when I wasn't dragging their baggage behind me. My projects started getting noticed. My boss pulled me aside one Friday afternoon and said, "Leon, you've really stepped up lately. I'm considering you for a leadership position on the next rollout." That single sentence lit a fire in me. For the first time, someone saw me not as a placeholder, not as the safety net, but as someone worthy of leading. The improvement didn't stop there. The lawyer I'd met with kept in touch, asking for more documents, guiding me through steps I never would have taken on my own. Leon, he said during one call, this isn't just about protecting yourself. With what you've got here, you can build leverage. Real leverage. That word echoed in my head for days. Leverage. I started networking, reaching out to colleagues and contacts I had overlooked before. Marcus introduced me to a small group of entrepreneurs who met weekly at a quiet cafe downtown. At first, I just listened, absorbing their conversations about investments, startups, and strategies. But one evening, I shared an idea I'd been developing quietly, a streamlined tool for small businesses to manage invoices, something I had tinkered with during long nights when I couldn't sleep. They didn't laugh. They didn't dismiss me. They leaned in, asked questions, offered feedback. By the end of the night, one of them said, Leon, you might be onto something here. That was the first time I realized I didn't just have to rise. I could build something entirely new. Money, which had always been a sore point thanks to my family's manipulation, started to shift in my favor too. I'd been saving steadily, and with the lawyer's help, I uncovered accounts my parents had tied to my name that I had legal grounds to reclaim. It wasn't an overnight windfall, but it was enough to breathe easier, to invest in myself instead of constantly being drained. Meanwhile, the silence from my family grew heavier. My parents stopped showing up at my apartment, though their messages still came through in bursts. Guilt-ridden one day, angry the next. You're tearing us apart. Why are you punishing us like this? Family is everything. You'll regret turning your back on us. I stopped reading them. I stopped letting their words burrow into my skin. Evan, however, was different. He reached out more than once, his tone softer, almost pleading. Leon, I don't get it. You've always been there for me. Why are you doing this now? We're brothers. The first time I nearly answered. But then I remembered every birthday where he blew out candles while I sat forgotten in the corner. Every time he wore the crown they handed him without once saying, what about Leon? His silence all those years spoke louder than any words he could give me now. As the months passed, the contrast between my old life and my new one sharpened. I was running in the mornings, leading projects at work, sketching plans for my startup at night. And for the first time, I wasn't weighed down by their constant shadow. I was free. And with that freedom came something I'd never felt before, control. Control over my choices. Control over my future. Control over the story they had tried to erase me from. And the more I built myself up, the more I realized that my rise wasn't just about me anymore. It was about power. Power they never thought I could have. Power they would never see coming. Because when the time was right, I wasn't just going to walk into their world again. I was going to turn it upside down. The rise was steady, but what came next was the turning point. The moment where all the pieces began to align in a way that almost felt fated. By then, 6 months had passed since I'd walked out of that house with my suitcase. In that time, I had transformed. I wasn't the silent shadow at the family table anymore. I was someone with momentum, someone with direction. And then, almost by accident, I stumbled into the opportunity that would set the stage for everything that followed. It started at work. After months of grinding, the leadership role my boss hinted at finally became official. I was given oversight of a mid-sized team for a new project, one with real visibility, real weight. It wasn't just about the title or the pay raise, though those were nice. It was about credibility. Suddenly, my name carried weight in circles I'd never been allowed into before. Meetings where I used to sit quietly in the corner were now meetings where people turned to me for decisions. It was subtle, but every "what do you think, Leon?" chipped away at the years of being silenced at home. But what made the position truly powerful wasn't just the role, it was the access. I was now in touch with clients, vendors, and business partners, many of whom had deep ties in the community. One of them was a man named Harrison, an older entrepreneur who had been around long enough to know everyone. He had a way of leaning back in his chair during conversations, studying me with sharp eyes that missed nothing. After one meeting, he pulled me aside and said, "You remind me of myself when I was younger." Smart, but underestimated. Don't waste time proving yourself to people who will never see your worth. Build your own table. That sentence stuck with me. Build your own table. I started spending more time with Harrison outside of work. Coffee meetings, networking events, quiet dinners where he shared stories of how he'd been overlooked early in his career, too. One evening after I told him about my idea for the small business invoicing tool, he tapped his finger against the table and said, "Leon, you've got something there. And I know people who'd be interested in backing you if you're serious." That was the first spark of something bigger than just escaping my family's shadow. It was the beginning of building a future they could never touch. But the real setup for revenge came in the most unexpected way. While digging deeper into my finances with my lawyer, we uncovered something unusual. Records tied not just to me, but to Evan. My parents, in their endless favoritism, had been sloppy. They had opened a joint account years ago, one that technically listed both Evan and me as legal guardians when we were minors. But here's the thing, even after we were adults, they had kept my name attached to certain assets. Assets Evan was now dipping into freely under the assumption that everything belonged to him. My lawyer leaned back in his chair when he showed me the paperwork and said, "They've built their little empire on shaky ground. And you, Leon, you're standing on the foundation." For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one holding scraps. I was holding the cards. The thought both thrilled and terrified me. With a few signatures, with the right moves, I could pull the rug out from under them. Not just my parents, but Evan too. But I didn't rush. I knew better now. Revenge wasn't about striking fast. It was about waiting until the blade would cut deepest. So, I kept building. I poured more into my startup idea, secured Harrison's mentorship, and slowly grew a small circle of allies who respected me for my work, not for my family name. I ran every morning, sharpened my mind, and reminded myself daily, patience. Then one night, I overheard something that confirmed it was time to prepare my move. I had gone to a networking event, and while chatting with a mutual contact, I heard them mention my brother's name. Evan, they said with a laugh. Oh, he's always at those fancy galas. Loves flashing money around. Can't hold on to anything for more than a week, though. It hit me like lightning. My brother was out there living recklessly, flaunting wealth that wasn't entirely his, built on accounts and loans tied partly to my name. He thought he was untouchable, still wearing the crown my parents had handed him. But crowns built on borrowed thrones don't last forever. I walked home that night with a strange calm settling over me. My parents had taught me my whole life that I was powerless. They had used me as a scapegoat, a backup plan, a forgotten shadow. But now I wasn't just rising. I was standing in a position where, with the right push, I could flip their entire world upside down. And I knew exactly how to do it. Revenge wasn't fire. It wasn't rage. It wasn't some wild, explosive act meant to burn everything at once. It was cold, deliberate, and quiet, like ice creeping across a window pane. Slow and inevitable. By the time I finally made my move, I wasn't trembling with anger anymore. I was calm. Almost too calm, because I knew what was coming and they didn't. The first strike was paperwork. With my lawyer's help, I initiated the transfer of those accounts. Yes, the very ones my parents had kept in my name, but funneled toward Evan's luxuries. They'd assumed I would never look closely, never realize the fine print made me a partial owner. But the law doesn't care about assumptions. With the right signatures and filings, the accounts shifted under my control. It wasn't theft. It wasn't manipulation. It was reclaiming what had always legally been tied to me. By the time Evan realized he couldn't swipe his card for another night out, the funds were already locked and redirected. I imagined the look on his face when the transaction failed, the sudden confusion, the phone call to Mom, the frantic scrambling. It almost made me laugh. But that was only the beginning. The second strike was exposure. I had kept records for years, stuffing them away in that dusty file box. Proof of loans. Proof of debt shifted onto me. Proof of negligence. With Harrison's connections, I didn't need to shout about it on social media or stage some dramatic confrontation. All it took was sharing those records with the right people. People whom my parents had spent years trying to impress in the community. Business acquaintances, church members, even a couple of extended relatives who had always been suspicious of how perfect Evan and my parents tried to appear. It was subtle. A quiet leak. A carefully dropped piece of information here and there. Enough for whispers to spread. Enough for the glossy image of the perfect family to crack. And then came the third strike. The one that truly turned the knife. Remember my startup idea? With Harrison's guidance and the small group of entrepreneurs backing me, it started gaining traction. Real traction. We secured our first round of funding. Modest, but strong. And suddenly, I was the name being mentioned in circles my parents desperately wanted to be part of. Invitations started arriving for panels, for networking dinners, for events where my name was on the program. So I decided to make my reappearance. It wasn't at a family dinner. It wasn't at their house. It was at a gala. One my parents and Evan were sure to attend. The kind where they could dress up and pretend they were part of something bigger. I arrived late, not out of carelessness, but intentionally, stepping into the grand hall in a fitted suit. Not flashy, but commanding. Conversations hushed as people recognized me, not as the forgotten son, but as the face of a rising business they'd been hearing about. I saw them before they saw me. My mother laughing too loudly at something trivial. My father holding court near the bar. Evan grinning with a drink in his hand, gesturing as if he owned the room. And then, they noticed. My mother's smile froze. My father's glass paused midair. Evan blinked, confused, as though he was seeing a ghost. For a moment, none of them moved. And then, almost instinctively, they tried to recover. Smiles pasted back on, arms open as if nothing had ever happened. "Leon," my father said, voice booming but brittle. "Son, there you are. We've been meaning to." I didn't let him finish. I simply smiled, calm and collected, and said, "You might want to check your accounts." The color drained from his face. My mother's hand tightened on her glass, knuckles white. Evan shifted uncomfortably, pulling out his phone under the table like he couldn't help himself. When he saw the balance, I watched his expression crumble. Confusion. Then panic. Then a flash of anger he didn't know where to place. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need a scene. All I had to do was exist, successful, untouchable, standing on ground they never thought I could claim. And the whispers around the room did the rest. People were already talking about the accounts, about the loans, about the years of favoritism and misuse. My family's perfect mask was shattering right there in real time. And I didn't have to lift a finger. That was the beauty of it. Revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't chaotic. It was standing there with a calm smile while the empire they built on my back collapsed around them. But this was only the beginning of their unraveling. The silence after my words, "You might want to check your accounts," hung in the air like a storm cloud. My father's jaw tightened, his booming voice failing him for the first time I could remember. My mother looked around the room, her eyes starting from one face to another as she realized the whispers weren't just whispers anymore. They were pointed, curious stares. And Evan. Evan looked at his phone like it had betrayed him, swiping again and again as if the numbers would change if he just looked hard enough. "Leon," my father finally managed, his voice slow. "Dangerous. What have you done?" But before I could even answer, someone else approached. Harrison. He shook my hand firmly, clapping me on the shoulder. "Leon, good to see you here. The work you're doing with your company, impressive stuff. You're going to make a real impact." He didn't even acknowledge my family. To him, they were just shadows on the wall. That moment sealed it. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. Me, recognized, respected, elevated. And then, exposed, unraveling. In the days that followed, the fallout spread like wildfire. My parents' reputation, carefully constructed over decades, collapsed under the weight of truth. The leaked documents circulated further than I ever expected. Extended family who had always believed my parents' golden child narrative began calling me, not with pity, but with apologies. "We never knew, Leon," my aunt said softly over the phone. "We should have seen it sooner." Evan's life unraveled faster than theirs. The reckless spending, the debts hidden under charm, the accounts now out of his reach. Suddenly, he wasn't the golden boy anymore. His friends who had been drawn to his money drifted away when the free ride stopped. His girlfriend, who had once posted pictures of their lavish trips, deleted them quietly and disappeared from his life. And my parents? They tried desperately to salvage control. My mother called me, her voice trembling in a way I had never heard. "Leon, we didn't mean to hurt you. We love you. We've always loved you." But I heard the cracks in her tone. Not love, but fear. Fear of losing everything. My father left me one last voicemail, his voice sharp and bitter. "You've ruined us. Do you understand that? You've destroyed this family." But he was wrong. They had destroyed it themselves years ago when they chose to give my life away piece by piece until I was left with nothing but silence. All I had done was refuse to carry their weight anymore. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel small. I felt free. Weeks later, I was invited to speak at a local business forum. Standing on that stage, looking out at a sea of faces, I realized this was the moment I had always dreamed of. Not applause, not attention, but respect. The kind of respect my family had denied me my whole life. And in that moment, I didn't need to think about them anymore. They had been my shadow for too long. As I finished my speech, I glanced at the back of the room. My parents weren't there. Evan wasn't there. They wouldn't be. Their world had crumbled, and mine had just begun. I left the stage to the sound of applause. Not thunderous, not overwhelming, but steady and real. And for the first time in my life, I believed it. I was enough. That night, as I walked home under the city lights, I pulled out my phone and typed one last message to my family. Not angry, not vengeful, just final. I didn't destroy this family. I simply stopped letting you destroy me. Goodbye. I hit send, slipped the phone into my pocket, and kept walking forward without looking back. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to cut ties with family to truly find yourself? Let me know in the comments below. I really want to hear your thoughts.